Okay, thank you. So we had one other keynote before the panel really started. Still, the panel now has started. Let me ask you first a few questions. As you know, I'm coming from a university. Who of you has studied at a university and likes to openly declare this? So who of you has studied somewhere? Okay, probably whatever university, whoever has suffered university life. Okay, and what I mean is then you know the following. In the morning, you have a lecture which may be exciting or boring or whatever, and it usually goes over time or whatever, and it has a simple topic and a simple title. And then in the afternoon, the exercise comes, and the text and the tasks and the titles become much more complex. So we have the same system here. You see, this is challenge B, and this is the title of this panel. This is significantly longer than the titles of the panels before and in the challenges that we had in the morning. But that is live, and the fact that you stayed here until the afternoon, I congratulate you for that, because now the real work starts. And the real work starts actually with 3 parts that you see in here, because actually these are 3 questions and not just one question for our panel if you look at it. It says, provided that challenge A can be met. So we probably need in this panel to make at least a bit of an assessment on whether actually after what we learned from the morning, challenge A can be met. We come back to that one. Then we have a very long thing. Can new voluntary international certifications within some nations' current legislative frameworks provide safeguards that are sufficiently extreme to reconcile meaningful personal privacy, effective lawful access, and prevention of malevolent use? So we want to have 3 goals that the question likes to achieve, and 3 goals, well, maybe at the same time, after each other, whatever. This is a relatively complex question, and it's not over yet, because we have the next thing. If so, and what are the core paradigms of such certification processes? So we have 3 questions, at least 2 of them are extremely complex. I start with the first one because that may be the easiest one. And I'm going to ask you, so after you've seen the morning and everything, well, do you think challenge A that you remember from the morning can be met? What do you think in the audience? Please, those of you who think that challenge A can be met, raise your hands. And those of you who don't think challenge A can be met, maybe can raise your hands. And those of you who are undecided? Okay, so we have a slight majority, I think, of the optimists, and we have a number of people, lots of people who are undecided, and we have a number of people who say this cannot be met. So now with that kind of thing, I would like to ask our panelists not only to introduce themselves if they haven't been introduced yet already, but to consider. We have basically 3 questions here, and we have less time than before. That's also the same with conferences and university. When the tasks get hard, the time gets less. So we have about 1 hour I negotiated for us. Therefore, I think we should try to start with an opening statement from each of you for, let's say, about 5 minutes. And if you can, please try to structure your answer according to the 3 questions that we have here. For question A, obviously, you already have made a statement by raising your hand. But for B and C, it would be nice if you could try to structure your statement a bit along that. Maybe you want to come up with an example or whatever you will consider useful. We can do it by sequence, or is anybody who likes to start first? And Stephen, do you actually hear us when I'm telling all of these funny stories? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Ah, perfect, good.
Okay, I just brought like 3 slides, so if you can project that very quickly, please. Thank you. So just to frame the problem just a little bit better, because I come from this sector, so that is from the sector of cybersecurity, and basically from cyber offensive security. Let's just hold on a minute. Because this is a complicated panel, it is a complicated challenge. And at least for me, it doesn't have really a clear answer. So I agree with Professor Bellovin, basically 99% of what he said, because that's my idea as well. But in practice, implementing this is going to be really a complicated and tough challenge for several reasons that probably we will see in a moment.
This never happens during lectures in the morning. It only happens during exercises in the afternoon, if you remember from your university time. Okay, now. No, this is not you.
No. Unless you want to talk about artificial intelligence.
Let's see, choose which one. Okay, maybe.
Okay.
Anybody else maybe? No. Is that good for you?
Not really, no?
Not really. Okay, could we
Okay,
maybe...
there we are. We
that
can
is-
jump straight this one, so we will go straight to the point. So what we're talking about today in cybersecurity is endpoint vectors. Those are these kind of tools that they install on your machines, in our machines basically, in order to perform cyber surveillance, so basically to steal your data. They are clearly a natural evolution of cyber surveillance tool because they work in synergy with passive tools. Passive tools are those probes that they install at the ISPs. Basically, they are on every ISP around the world. And they can be used to profile a target. They can be used to gather preliminary information before an attack. And basically, they are used to enhance the chances of success that they have before they target you. They've been invented, these tools, to overcome the problems that we have with passive probes. So the main problem was that when we started using encryption, monitoring people became harder, of course, because most of the information wasn't available anymore to the police, to the intelligence forces, or not true? Okay. Basically, yeah. Okay. What Richard is telling here is that they could actually break the encryption, but not every government is capable of that. So every government is capable of that. Okay, thank you. Well, the thing is that in order to overcome encryption and get a different type of evidence, we started developing endpoint vectors, which are powerful tools, but at the same time they are really invasive. So the next question, the next issue is are the problems that these tools are presenting to the intelligence and to the police and to the lawful interception systems. The thing is that those are invasive. That means what type of data they should acquire. Is it fair that they acquire the picture of your kids, or is it fair that they acquire your emails? That's a problem. Actually, it's an unsolved problem today. The second thing is that they are hard to track. The problem with this is that it is software. So it is not trivial to say when it is being installed on your machine, when it's been used, if it was removed, and for how long it's been operated. So that's another issue that we have to deal with. And the third thing is that they're very easy to deploy because they can be delivered everywhere. They're not tied, geographically speaking, to the country. It's not like an ISP probe. I can go to my ISP, I can install the ISP probe, but I can do that only in my country. I cannot go to the US and say, hey, will you please install this black shiny box into your spam ports? They won't do that, hopefully. So they're not tied to the geographical country. They can be deployed everywhere. So in theory, we could infect anybody without a warrant, and this can be illegal, and it's been done illegally for really a long time. Though the good thing is that they are not trivial to scale. That is, reaching and achieving mass interception with endpoint vector is not easy, because you cannot really infect like 10,000 people in one day and expect that nobody will notice, because somebody will notice eventually. They're active tools. They're not passive probes that are listening to traffic. So they are actually doing something on your machine, something that you can spot some way or another. And how do we reconcile this type of interception, this type of bugs that we saw on machines with the lawful interception? Because at the end of the day, intelligence, police, and forces, and whoever, they need to be able to intercept people when they think they're dangerous. So while I'm personally against massive surveillance, I think that targeted surveillance is probably a better alternative if you want to imagine like that. Now, the first thing that you have to do is that you cannot trust companies to behave ethically in this field, because they won't. As long as there is a market, they will try to expand to every market. So you have to impose heavy penalties, and they have to pay fees when they infringe that. This is the only way, probably, and possibly one of the most effective way that you have to keep the technology constrained to a certain country. So, other than, of course, actually incorporating this type of entities inside the governmental institutions, because as long as they're private, they can go everywhere, they can sell to everybody. The second point that's important to me is that we don't have to impose a state-mandated vectors, because those are dangerous. But the moment I do add, I do add a vector to a system, at the same time, somebody else, some other country can exploit that in order to steal our data. So it begins a war. And what Professor Bellovin was saying is that actually we should rely on zero-day vulnerabilities, because they are already in the software. Hopefully they're not put there on purpose. They might in some cases, but the point is that we are not creating additional security problems. And the other point is that it is not really a scalable model. So even in this case, we are allowed as law enforcement agencies to track some people, but without going into mass surveillance like we've been seeing the NSA doing. And that's all for now.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. Later we come back to the relation to the questions. And now, please, the next one. That would be Richard, probably.
If you could bring back
The original question, please. Yes,
Yes.
thanks a lot. Please bring back the original question.
Alla prossima puoi rispondere alle domande, anche se hai
You have
Well.
a microphone on, actually, if you do. Okay, but Richard hopefully has a microphone also now.
I
yes.
know. Should I wait for it to come? Okay. I think this is a misguided goal. Now, with regard to Challenge A, I don't know. I think we have to strip out the term constitutionally meaningful, as I said before, but then we get a meaningful, a sensible question whose answer I don't know. But here, this goal makes no sense. We don't have to reconcile personal privacy and effective lawful access. And to talk about that suggests that you're somehow putting things in the system to ensure government surveillance power. And that's completely backwards now because the government has far too much surveillance power. While they piss and moan about how certain kinds of surveillance are becoming more difficult sometimes, the fact is they get tremendous amounts of data about people because of systems now that collect digital dossiers about people. And this is the real danger, not too little government surveillance, but far too much, more than the Soviet Union was able to carry out. This threatens democracy, because in order to have democracy, we need a free press with sources that the government can't find. We need dissidents to be free to discuss together and plan their protests without being sabotaged by the state. And this is very hard with the current level of surveillance. Nowadays, it's very hard to be a whistleblower and not be caught. And as a result, you need both the care and the knowledge of a Snowden to get away. If it's too hard to be a whistleblower safely, we won't have enough of them. We will not know what the government is doing, and it will be essentially out of control. This is the tremendous danger we face. The standard way governments protect their unjust aspects is by distraction. You have too many thugs, uniformed thugs, shooting people on the street. Well, you claim that there's a war on cops. It's not true, but even if people even think there was one, they get distracted from the real danger, which is the impunity of those armed marauders. And likewise, when we see the danger of the government surveilling everyone too much, of a situation where the government can identify whistleblowers so as to imprison them, where the only person who was put in prison for CIA torture was the man who told us about CIA torture, John Kiriakou, I believe he was. Well, it's clear that those concerns are pushing in the wrong direction. We have to reduce the amount of surveillance the government does, and rather than take up your time with a lot of details, I refer you to my article, gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance versus democracy.html. Now, I don't want to put an end to investigations authorized by courts, but we must focus our energy on cutting down the amount of massive surveillance so that a government can't say to national security journalists, we don't need to subpoena your records. We know who you're talking to.
Okay, thanks a lot. That means basically, so far we had one way to try to answer question 2 and 3. We have one way to say question 2 is so wrong that question 3 isn't even on the table as far as I understood. Let's see what the next speaker says.
Okay, thank you. Just have to get my thought back. I think there is something to reconcile, in fact, which is from a state point of view. Two responsibilities that a state has. I hesitate to say the government, which is to provide or to make sure that the citizens have their privacy, but also to guarantee a safety, a public safety and security. This is the thing to reconcile, and to go on the IT field is one of the, let's say, the battlefields or whatever that we have to consider. But I think where we are now is possibly that governments actually, or the executive dimension of the state takes the decision. And I think what I would claim is much more parliamentary control on this. If we heard that the courts are doing the job, this is actually in my role it would be the last, the ones to decide if something has gone wrong or not. So I think a strong parliamentary control on this whole thing, on this reconciliation, and we need, I think, an open debate, not public necessarily, but open between those who have to take the decision, to make the decisions, parliament, government, and the experts who can assess the consequences of these decisions. And if there, and I guess what is true is that either we admit or we open additional attack vectors by anything that we do, if we put in these backdoors, etc. And it can turn out into a question of liability, because if it is a business, a company being surveyed, and something goes wrong and it's reputation dependent, and most of them are, then if you sell it for €1 the next day, question is who is going to be liable. And definitely from personal experience, if you start the discussion this way, then you will get no reply. You will get refusal from, for example, national security agencies. They are not able, they are not willing to discuss it. This is why I come back to the initial statement that we need a very, very strong parliamentary control.
Okay. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for flying me from the US to Europe. And I would like to say that every time since the post-Snowden the case, that when I come to Europe, that this has become more and more a culture shock. So one of the things, for example, that has
maybe you want to quickly introduce yourself.
So I'm Ivo Desmedt, and so and at the moment I live during the year in Texas and in the summer in London. So one thing that has not been discussed during this morning, and which is in sharp contrast with what has been discussed. What has been discussed is illegal wiretapping, the stealing data, etc. What has not been discussed is willingly provide data to foreign entities. In particularly, Europeans going and doing a Google search, putting their pictures on Facebook. When I travel to China, I have many co-authors in many different countries, in particular also a few in China. When I travel to China, what do I find? China has its own search engine, protecting better against foreign eavesdropping. It has its own social network, Ren. It has its own Twitter, many actually. WeChat is one. What does Europe have on those? It used to have Skype. It allowed it to be sold to a foreign country. So I think it is quite shocking. China is not supposed to be a democratic country. And so this is the EU, which is supposed to protect its citizens, doesn't do anything when you compare it to China. Then secondly, if you now look at state-implemented malware and state-sponsored malware, we were talking this morning, about basically having some chips developed in Europe. One of the speakers was talking about that. China is doing that today. It's also developing its own software platform, something that Europe is not doing. So I'm really shocked. And so if you actually look at whether privacy can be obtained, whether challenge A can be met, I have strong doubts that challenge A can be met. When Snowden case happened, the US government made a mistake. What they said is that each computer that Snowden touched was destroyed, but they also accidentally leaked that every cable that was on these computers was destroyed. That was not in the Snowden leak. That was leaked by the US government. So the reporters then asked, why did you also destroy the cables? The US had already leaked half. So they said, you know, if you order cables, Ethernet cables via the internet for your local area network, even if you have an air gap and you're not on the internet for your local area network, then if you are a target, we will actually put a bug in there. NSA today is able to listen 7,000 kilometers away from telecommunications over the air. If you have tanks in Europe communicating with each other, 7,000 kilometers away, they can listen. They use for that a model of the ionosphere, and this is unclassified. So I don't know what they do classified, but just have an idea of what they can do unclassified. So is challenge A, is that possible? I have strong doubts. So then if you look at legal issues, there is the word legislative framework. How can we arrive to a legislative framework? As Richard was saying, we are moving toward a new Soviet system. There is no need for a neo-Soviet system that spies on all its citizens. We had that. It collapsed. If the West wants to copy the Soviet Union, we know what way it will go. It will collapse. There is no need for a new Warsaw Pact. It existed. It collapsed. So I think that eventually people as Ronald Reagan will win. Let's freedom reign. And finally, if you want to use key escrow or all the other ways, there are many, many ways to bypass those. Russia avoids electronics for all its top-level security. This morning, we heard about Volkswagen using deceptive engineering technology. You can use steganography, which is another deceptive technology. You have to do it properly. If you don't put yourself on the internet and you're trying to basically, if you do this deceptive technology, if you don't do it well, then you end up being detected. So it's not that trivial. And finally, if you don't want to use the internet, make sure to use it anyway to pretend to use it, but you don't do your real communications via there. There's a very nice research that has taken place in South Africa, and that's switching to pigeons. And it turns out that in most Western countries, except South Korea, if you have a large file, it is faster to communicate it via pigeon than via the internet. And so far I know NSA does not capture pigeons. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ivo. It is true that there is this massive abusive. Do you hear
I
me?
think we hear you, yes.
There is
From
this
Ivan to
massive abusive
Jovic,
surveillance,
from the keynote.
especially by some countries. But this is what we do not plan to tackle in this meeting. It's very serious, and how to tackle that is out of team here. So what we want to deal with here is cyber security, cyber privacy, and lawful cyber surveillance. Lawful cyber surveillance is focused cyber surveillance. So it is not, in a sense, targeted. It is focused. It can be focused on types of data because we have tremendous amounts of data on the internet. Typically, when we talk about lawful interception, we think of communications, phone conversations, but there are enormous amounts of data. For example, especially in the future with the smart homes, electronic health, wearables, data stored in the cloud. Do they have a right, the governments, to read all this data if needed? I don't think so. So this is what I consider focused. So focused also on the type of data. Focused on time. We want this forward secrecy, backward secrecy, so not unlimited in time. So we need to reconcile cyber privacy with this lawful interception. So we accept that has taken. So this is something that we need to do. So lawful access is under certain conditions. The governments have access, could have access to this data that is, say, secured, maybe by encryption. So privacy, as I said this morning, is about security of data, sensitive data, and about users' control. If the data is not encrypted or secured, then access is easy. If it is encrypted, then we have to look at the security chain. So on the top, there are algorithms and protocols. Then there are cryptographic keys that are used. Then there is software and there is hardware. And of course, there are humans, there are administrators and others. So if you want to penetrate into the systems, so say crypto is used, there are some keys there, you can give access to governments, so lawful access, either to via algorithms, so maybe you can use backdoors in algorithms. You can also via keys do that, so maybe you can use predictable keys, and in fact, not surprisingly, this is what has been used, in fact. But then via keys, it can be done a different way. You can deposit keys somewhere. This is key escrow. But the main point there is not only key escrow to deposit the keys, it's also key sharing. So among independent entities, this is what gives privacy there and gives robustness also via threshold secret sharing. Then if we move down, further down, there is software, and then there is this issue of vulnerabilities. There is maybe 100,000 vulnerabilities in modern operating systems today. So we can, they are used. They are used, maybe it can be done legally, I don't know. So this is, and then another point is, if you go further down, it's hardware vulnerabilities and backdoors. So to my mind, the best way to do lawful access, to allow lawful access, is via the keys. Because if you go further down via backdoors and in software and hardware, the consequences are dramatic. There is no focus. So basically, the best way is through the keys. But then there is a problem there. There is this time. So the forward secrecy, backward secrecy. So there is a way to overcome that problem. Instead of sharing the keys, you can use what is called shared decryption functions. So maybe we'll talk tomorrow about that, and then this might be a way how to perform lawful access to sensitive data.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jovan. We have five people gone, 2 still to go. What I can already tell you, and you saw that, the good news is we have different opinions on the panel, so it will not become boring, hopefully. Now we have.
I will play the mercenary if you want. No, yeah, I'm not sure challenge A can be met at least easily, but I will answer yes, because otherwise then I stop here. Again, having the lawyer's hat, I really think that regulation is necessary. So when I read here new voluntary international IT certifications, my point is it won't be sufficient. Someone has to do something. And when I say someone, it can be self-censorship by the governments which were used for many years not to have any control, not oversight. So I don't assume that the governments or the executive branch themselves, without any pressure from parliament or laws, will change their behavior. Pressure might come, but with slow process through the courts. And one of my messages today is that it is worth, at least in Europe, seizing up the courts, because you will have judges making very strong arguments against massive surveillance and other abuses. But someone needs to intervene, and there should be regulation in place. So to answer the question, voluntary international IT certification, I think we take really the risk of basically outsourcing the problem and having it fully addressed by people we will need to trust, so another proxy, but maybe one proxy too much, because we need really to get trust from the system without a party telling us, yeah, you can trust this system, it works. I would need, as a citizen, as a user, to experiment the trust myself. And I'm not sure that it would be sufficient for me to have a kind of a label, you can use this solution, and it works like that. But who should intervene? I think that the parliaments might not be entirely trustworthy on that, because it's very difficult for a politician right now to take. It's very difficult for a politician right now to take a stance that basically is not influenced by what you see by playing on the fears of the people. Okay, because when you think about mass surveillance, you can easily play the argument of we need to protect our citizens against extreme threats, which has some reasoning and some legitimacy, but not to the point where basically it should shift the balance or secure advantages for the government. So the courts do not have, it seems to me, or they have a less political agenda. They need to make sure that the laws are applied. However, the courts can't be implemented, they can't work without at least a hint by the legislator as to what should be the main discourse. And for me, from a legal perspective right now, I do have a real issue. When I read the laws, when I read the act, that's what I do as a living. I read the laws. I cannot tell you whether the will of the people is to favor privacy or to favor surveillance. We are right in this middle ground. So the legislative powers need to give a strong message. We favor privacy over surveillance. We know that there are downsides to that. We will miss one or two criminals. We will have more difficulties accessing certain protected data. Fine, we will deal with that, but there should be a very clear political statement. We put privacy first because this is a human right, because of many philosophical considerations. And then, once we have said that, then we discuss about what limited access can be done. And with regard to limited access or lawful access, I think the providers should be out of the room. So any attempt by any legislation to basically be lazy and go where the keys are, i.e. where the provider will have the keys, that's not what I expect from the police of my country. I expect them to be smarter than the criminals. I expect them to have a hard life. I expect them to find a way with other data that is available to find this criminal. But not directly think, oh, I have an easy way. I have a law that says that I can do it. I just call a judge, get a signature, and then have a massive amount of data that I will not use. I don't want to incentivize laziness among the police force.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, I was about to ask later maybe for votes, but obviously we have some already. Still, I think, Stephen, you're the next one.
Okay, I want to address this from several different perspectives, one of which is simply user control. Most security mechanisms, especially cryptographic mechanisms, are very, very hard for ordinary people to get right. If you're going to encrypt to whom, what assurance do you have, and so on. There's a tremendous amount of research that's necessary to do that just on how users can manage to control encryption, make sure they're encrypting to the right person. What is their assurance? There are other related assurance issues such as hardware. There's a little light on my above my screen right now telling me that the camera is on. But we've also seen reports and technical papers on how to turn on cameras without turning on little lights. The hardware manufacturers haven't concentrated enough on assurance. The designers haven't concentrated enough, which is why you can get USB devices and Thunderbolt lightning devices and so on that can do nasty things to a computer's memory if you just plug the cable in. So this was an architectural failing. So there's a whole host of things for assurance that are missing that we just don't really, either sometimes don't know how to do, sometimes haven't thought about. Then there's the whole issue of software reliability, software correctness. As I said in my talk, that's an unsolved problem, and I expect it to remain that way, but maybe we can do a lot better. Say what you will about the closed nature of the iPhone platform, it does have a much better security track record than almost any other platform. We saw the reports about the Xcode Ghost the other day about a sabotaged compiler toolchain. Well, it turns out that in order to install that sabotage compiler, developers had to click past the warning messages. And these are developers who are presumably sophisticated computer users, not end users. If they're going to click past warning messages, why do we expect ordinary people who aren't trained in this sort of stuff to heed them? So there's a whole host of technical issues that have to be addressed before we can even get to the policy ones. When it gets to the policy issues, my big goal, other than not making software less secure, is I want a solution that does not readily scale to massive attacks, massive surveillance. One of the very nice things about this targeted hacking, lawful hacking scheme that I described is that it's slow. That's by design. It's slow and expensive, and that's a feature, not a bug. It makes it much more difficult to tap 100,000 or 1 million people simultaneously. You tap them one at a time. And having limits like that on law enforcement, economic limits, which are harder to override by passing a law, is a good thing. In fact, in a recent U.S. Supreme Court case which involved privacy, Justice Alito commented that that was traditionally one of the limits on police power, was simply the economics of surveillance, prohibited massive surveillance. He thought that was a good thing, a traditional thing in the U.S., and I agree with him.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. Now we had about 5 minutes from everybody who was speaking. Obviously, we do have disagreement on the panel. That's good. And my proposal would be now we have, let's say, a 2-minute statement from each of you on, let's say, your favorite other statements that you would like to oppose to. And that should give us afterwards give some time to also collect statements from the audience. So probably we want to start over there, 2 minutes on whatever your favorite statement from others that you consider needs to be dealt with on now. If this all doesn't work and if you don't have anything to say, then I will ask questions on this. And I have done a PhD on certification processes, so better you come up with statements.
Yeah, I will try to challenge, take this question in 2 minutes. I think the assumptions of many people is that we're on the defense side, but we should be on the attack because backdoors are currently everywhere, state mandated or state sanctioned. And everybody agrees here, otherwise someone would have objected to challenge one, saying we already have it. Nobody has objected. Why? Because backdoors are mandated or state sanctioned, mandated like lawful intercept or state sanctioned. All the vulnerabilities that have been inserted are everywhere. So we shouldn't be on a defense. We should be propositive, like Stephen are doing. They don't like to put backdoors and so on. They're trying to find a solution that can allow us to get to challenge A. Public security problem. Half of our lives are on the internet, on cyber life in the Western world. Communications are always been used to make crimes. So not seeing that there is a problem or potential abuse of these tools, it's impossible. There is. But nevertheless, the current governments are not going dark. Why? Because they have backdoors everywhere. It's not an issue of the government going dark now. The problem is that the government could go dark. If algorithmically unbreakable encryption is matched with meaningful security at the endpoint, that could actually go dark on criminals. And that's something that could create huge problems. In the Middle East, there are billions of petrodollars and lots of very, very, very upset people, or distorted, or both, that could do a lot of damage if we didn't have infrastructure to stop that. And so it is a problem. The two promising solutions that I see to solve this, one is lawful hacking approach of Stephen, which is great. And another one is the one that we saw before we described with Serpro, which basically, if you have server-side components which already host user-sensitive data on a server, then you have offline, in-person processes similar to the ones that you have at the voting booth that would guarantee both the user and the government as far as this. And so these, of course, need certification, extreme safeguards, and overall a governance which couldn't be current states, because these states have lost trust. That's the promising I see.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rufo. Marco, you like to continue?
Alberto.
Alberto, sorry.
Okay. I see an issue here that is, as it was said before, I'm not sure that we can always trust the government. So I wouldn't really play to make the life easier to the government. I think that ultimately we are responsible for our own security. So we should adopt encryption, end-to-end encryption, whatever it is that can protect our data to the maximum extent possible. So I would apply really game theory in this case. So I will leave the government make their own work, their own homework, and use the vectors that we have everywhere, basically, to get into our data, to exploit the vulnerabilities that there are, instead of helping the government and put new things into our software, making it more insecure. So that's my point of view, and that there must be laws in this case, of course, to be sure that these instruments are not abused. But I don't think there should be law that can allow them to put additional interception measures into what we already have, because everything is basically already intercepted at this point.
Aside from whether they intercept everything now, they're tracking us in so many other ways that they're getting far too much surveillance power. The idea that that things are going dark is an exaggeration or else a hypothetical future possibility. And whichever one it is, it's being used to distract us from the real threat. So we should refuse to be distracted. We shouldn't compromise on our privacy at all to prevent this imaginary problem, because we need to protect ourselves from the real problem, which is too much digital data collection about us. We have to insist that systems be designed so that they don't know who is dealing with them, so that they don't accumulate records about people. And I referred you to the article suggesting many specific ways. But what's relevant here is we have no reason to help government when it pleads with us to enable it to surveil us. No, we should say, we're going to worry about the big problem, which is you have too much information about everybody. And if there ever isn't too much anymore, then we'll pay attention to your concerns.
Okay, thanks a lot. Michael?
I should pick one to oppose. In fact, I don't have one, but I'll pick one that I would like to endorse, which is from Michel on the right from your side. It's actually this thing of adequacy and proportionality. I think being the very last resort, actually, for prosecution to tap into these things, not making life easier, because this is what is happening right now, that it's taking very easily by institutions to say, okay, we have this mass of data because it's there anyway, so we are using it. I think this should be much more restricted, and nothing else to add to that.
I would like to add a comment, and this comment is related to what Richard Stallman said earlier. So what he said is that whistleblowers are now being prosecuted by the Obama administration, and he wasn't very happy about that. So I would like to add something to this. And we were looking at legal issues, enforcing the law, etc. During the Cold War, there were many people in spying agencies who were not agreeing with the policy of the spying agencies. They were regarded as traitors. One of them was Kim Philby. During the Cold War, what happened? They either were prosecuted or they defected to the Soviet Union. I think that today, people in spying agencies who do betray the principles of the West of freedom should be prosecuted, including if you're the head of the agency. Kim Philby was quite high also, and otherwise be encouraged to defect. Thank you.
Okay, let's say something about abusive surveillance, massive surveillance. I also think that going dark is just an excuse. In fact, the point is, the name of the game is having access to these enormous amounts of data, sensitive data over the internet, because who has access to this data has enormous predictive power and control in the real world. So this is the name of the game. And then what is funny, in fact, we are all talking about governments as some power above us. In democratic countries, the governments are elected by people. So basically, this has not become yet an election issue, but it could. So this massive surveillance, how to control this process, I believe that we need these lawful access techniques and processes and certifications to make things right and thus avoid, at least legally, massive surveillance.
Thank you. I think executive branches and spying agencies already know that they have lost the war again regarding encryption. They lost it in the 90s regarding the US. They lost it again because there is no ground, no justification that is possible to continue to give a message and ask the parliament to back and the states to back a system where you can easily decrypt private communications. There is no legal basis, there is no economical basis. The going down issue basically with like a curtain or smoke, it will disappear because there are many other ways of collecting this information. And there is one additional element which I think is very important. US companies are the victim of cyber attacks and they are hard hit. And if the information were protected through encryption, it would be much better. Today we learned that there are now more than 5 million fingerprints being hacked at the Office for Personal Management of the US government. You can't on the one side make everything you can to try and convince people that it is good to leave a backdoor and have a third party access that information, and in the same day announce that you're incapable of securing your critical infrastructure. And I think that this is new. So when you're the president of the United States, you may need to make a balance. Is it about accessing to privileged information with a lot of investment, public backlash, or finding using a solution, technical solution that is available and used to protect assets? Now, of course, then the PR guys will present it as a way of protecting privacy. I don't care so much about the way it is done. The result is, I think, that in 2 years, encryption will be a privileged tool used by the governments without any possible intervention by a third party. To finish, regarding Steve's proposal, I think it's really helpful to the extent that basically it provides an easy possible compromise you can discuss of, because the spying agencies will be very happy once they have fully realized that they can't go frontal about encryption, that there is something that can still do, that is exploit existing vulnerabilities. I'm not happy about the end outcome because that's not what I want. I don't want my government to exploit vulnerabilities, but it is much better than the current situation if they are left to playing with that battleground and leaving intercept aside.
Okay, thanks a lot. Stephen, now it's upon you.
I'll just add one extra note, partly disagreeing, I guess, even with myself. Very few judges or legislators have any particular degree of technical sophistication, and that makes it very hard to win such a debate on purely technical grounds. There are a few who do. I'll note in a recent congressional hearing in the U.S. when the FBI came looking for these backdoors, the 2 members of Congress who were the most skeptical happened to have undergraduate degrees in computer science because they know how hard it is to create reliable software. So we cannot assume that we're going to win just in those grounds. I would say that's especially true in a judicial setting. Judges are less likely to have technical backgrounds, and you're generally dealing with a very small number of judges who are hearing only from a few parties, rather than a larger public debate where you get newspaper editorials and op-ed columnists and so on saying, technically this is the way things work. So you've got to be very, very careful here in whom you put your trust. It's not an easy problem.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. So we have panelists who disagree, but they're extremely diplomatic with each other, I would think. And if you want to push them harder, probably you have to ask the questions, or I have to. So now it's time for the audience.
Much focus has been given to encryption, but what about metadata? Is the panel assuming that it's okay for law enforcement agencies to gather metadata without any kind of approval by judges? Because the metadata, you know, they are traceable. You know, encryption doesn't protect you against it. So it's an open question, actually.
Would you have 3 favorites that you would like to ask? I see 2 volunteers are here. You're happy with the volunteers, okay?
I don't know whether you actually know that, but in most NATO countries since the 1960s, every postal mail that you send is also tracked from where to where it goes. So if you're trying to address that, you have to start with the Postal Service and make sure they abolish this. So it's that was introduced artificially. Before the 1960s, the technology wasn't deployed in Europe. So it's very hard. There is some work on anonymity that has been done. One of them is the use of Tor. At the moment that you use Tor, you will make yourself visible to NSA to an extent that you cannot imagine. So I would strongly, so you have some solutions, but if you're going to use a solution, you're going to make yourself extremely visible. So the internet hasn't been designed for anonymity, and so therefore it's a nice goal, but there are some theoretical solutions that have been proposed in the anonymity community, but bringing them to practice is very different.
Well, I just wanted to show you how visible I am because I use Tor for basically all communication over the internet. We must reduce the state's ability to collect metadata about all of us because it's getting too much information about everybody. And see gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance vs democracy.html.
Okay. Any other volunteer? Otherwise, we have a next question over here. You had a question, did you? You had one. Okay. Who else has questions so that I can?
I have a comment, and then I'll try to lecture you on something. So first, my comment. I don't think that the method of using vulnerabilities to tap into someone's phones or communication is going to scale endlessly, because I'm working on the side of actively reducing the number of vulnerabilities that we're exposed to by reducing the complexity of the software stacks that we use. And eventually, I hope that we will be able to communicate with fewer vulnerabilities that would open our systems up to surveillance over that path. And secondly, so I'm skeptical. And secondly, my lecture, I wanted to lecture you about a German word. I'm a German person, and there's this cool word called Datensparsamkeit, which translates into something like data frugality. I believe that I, as a German, have a right to be anonymous and to use pseudonyms, and I also have the right to not have my data tracked. I know that the EU is actively trying to undo that kind of legislation, but I'm pretty proud of it, actually. And
You're talking about a right or some kind of legislation that implements that right?
I think it's actually a right that was developed by some of the major courts in Germany. So I actually hope that it never turns out the way that a police officer can tap into my conversations with just obtaining a simple warrant. I want the police to have a hard job, so I'm completely on your side. I think they do a tremendous job, actually, so I feel completely safe living in Germany, despite having the right to anonymity and despite not having lots of data collected about me. And that's because the police is very competent and they do a very good job. And I want them to continue doing that job, but it must not be too easy for them.
Okay. So anybody from the okay,
Yes,
there's one volunteer from the panel
yeah,
who wants to
I would
react
like
to
to,
this.
to reply that.
Oh, there were two panels.
Yeah, it's
two people from the panel were reacting already by
yeah, it's
clapping,
no,
and one other person
regards to
wants
this statement,
react.
first of all, when you say that you have a right as a German citizen, well, every American person has a right to be happy. That doesn't mean they're happy.
No, it's in the Declaration of Independence, and the right is the pursuit of
Okay. Oh yeah, you're definitely right. That was a wrong statement by me. There are many rights which are inscribed in the Constitution, but then if they're not enacted within the Constitution with specific provisions and then in laws, those are just smoke in your eyes. For example, German government has been reported recently that they actually sold access to German citizens in order to get access to some tools now for surveillance and many other issues that should warn you as a European citizen, and that has many other governments as well. And well, many here said that we should make it more difficult for governments to surveil rather than make it more easy. I agree with that on one side, and not on that. On massive surveillance, it should be harder. So it should be harder for them to scale, because then it's hard to control when they scale big time. But we shouldn't make it too hard to do targeted surveillance, because if we do make it hard, like it happened in the 90s with algorithmically unbreakable encryption, then they will find another way. And the way they found is break every endpoint beyond encryption for the last 20 years. And so the fact that in 20 years we have not found a way for law enforcement to find a way to legitimately access to that has pushed agencies with the complicity of the civil governments to find other ways. And these ways are also supported by 50% of the population. That's a problem. If you see surveys after all it's come out from NSA and so on, there's still many people that understand that these people are actually after a legitimate aim while they're breaking the law and so on and so forth. So solving challenge B may be the only way we can do challenge A, because otherwise they will never let challenge A go to market.
You're bringing up again phantoms that we're supposed to be scared of. The fact is, with a court order, they can plant a microphone in somebody's house and a camera and whatever else they want. They don't even need to do anything to the person's computers to get all the surveillance they want. So, and about people for whom court orders are being issued. So, I think that this is a fantasy fear.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question, and I wanted also to make a comment. So first, the comment is, I want to strongly support and add to Richard Stallman's argument that at the moment we are wasting a lot of time with a lot of bright minds in this room about a hypothetical issue of at some point law enforcement going dark, and we are not focusing on the very real threat right now happening, that we don't have privacy at the moment at all, and we actually have a human right to privacy. So before a law enforcement agency approaches the government and says, well, we need mandatory key escrow, or we need backdoors, or we want to have more zero vulnerabilities, which in Germany, I'm the other German in the room, is just gave the BND, the German intelligence agency, another 300 million, amongst other things, to buy zero-day vulnerabilities. Before they do that, I want to see data from law enforcement and intelligence agencies regarding their evaluation of their own processes and the effectiveness. And that was actually the key point why, in front of the Constitutional Court in Germany, the mandatory data retention law was struck down, because they couldn't provide the data at all. Even after a year of mandatory data retention laws, they didn't show a single case where the mandatory data retention actually led to investigative leads. That was also the argument of the European courts regarding mandatory data retention. So before a law enforcement agency approaches me and says, oh, we are going dark, well, then the sensible answer is, well, show me the data. Give me the evaluation of your own needs, and then we can talk about if it's actually necessary. And the other thing was, actually, I lied. I don't have a question. I just have another comment.
Oops. Well, at least then you should give people the chance.
Yeah.
Choose 3 favorite panelists, or at least one of them, whom you like to react to your comment now.
I actually reacted to Richard Stallman.
So who should react on you now? Who from the panel should react to you?
Everybody who opposes with the opinion that law enforcement agencies or intelligence agencies need to provide more data in regards of effectiveness and evaluation. And just the last sentence, there is no right to what you stated before. There's no right to anonymity or pseudonymity or encryption in Germany. We only have the Datensparsamkeit in the Bundesdatenschutzgesetz. I'm sure there are a lot of German words. It's the data protection law in Germany, and even the German government doesn't abide to it. So
Okay, so who would like to oppose to the point made by our audience member in terms of that the agencies should lie more down what they actually wanted, why they wanted. Ivo is volunteering.
I think that if you look at do they need bigger budgets, I think that they need bigger budgets for the right things. If you look at, for example, the CIA used to have intelligence people on the ground that would do intelligence instead of doing this massive spying. They have been reduced. Are there examples where it would have helped? Yes, look at the Thalys attack. This person was known in Spain but wasn't properly followed. With the proper intelligence as the old-fashioned way, this person would not have been able to do this attack. The same for the London bombers. The London bombers were known. There was a shortage of manpower to follow them. Again, yes, increase for the right parts of intelligence agency, all for. Increase of mass surveillance, that makes no sense. Are there the stories that are also not so successful? The main success story that was told roughly 10 years ago was the prevention of a football stadium being blown up in London. And the argument that was made in court was that these people had the blueprint of the football stadium. It was Arsenal, if I remember correctly. Afterwards, it turned out that the football club was actually selling to its fan club blueprints of the stadium, and that the people who were these members that were being accused were Islam. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. And we negotiated 15 extra minutes from Rufo to be able to extend this panel to 4:30. And can we negotiate more minutes from you for our last panelist round, or is the coffee so urgent?
If Jovan agrees, he's a co-organizer. No.
No.
Please.
Okay, so there is the last panelist. Is there one last urgent question from the audience? I think you had actually raised your hand before.
I want to ask about the role of governments that the panelists brought up in developing solutions to the questions we brought up today. So China has already made a national operating system, Kairen, based on the Linux operating system, but Linux kernel. Yeah, GNU Linux. But I would think twice before using the Kairen operating system if I cared about my privacy. The Chinese walled network was brought up, but this is an ecosystem motivated entirely by surveillance. So if we have the major participation of certain governments, none of whom want to give up control, participate in the solution for these tech problems, wouldn't it lead to balkanization of the internet and corrosion to the integrity to the network that makes the network so valuable, and make sort of national tech solutions easier to control and lead to more surveillance? One of the reasons that I think free software is so trustworthy is because this is a distributed model of development that makes it less likely that any one power would stand out clearly. But
Well, but I want to say something. The Chinese requirements are clearly aimed at Chinese surveillance of Chinese. So when a country says data about the citizens of this country must be kept in this country, well, that makes it harder for other countries to surveil those people and easier for that country to surveil those people. So it can be good or bad depending on how dangerous their government is to them. I think for most Americans and Europeans, it might be a very good thing to have your data stored in China. If you really don't care whether China knows anything or everything about what you do, it might be safer having China watch you than having your own government watch you. On the other hand, for Chinese dissidents or anyone doing anything the Chinese government doesn't like, they'd rather have their data stored in the U.S., I suppose. But when you talk about balkanization and diminishing the value of the network, we have to ask what kind of value you're talking about. Businesses gush about the tremendous value to them of knowing a lot about people. I don't think that that's a value to society. I think it's a form of predation, and I hope that it gets defeated, but not just by firewalls between countries, but rather by many things to cut off that data to them. But when we talk about the value of the internet to us, to people in general, for that it's enough that we can communicate with each other when we want to. And so weird data about us are stored is a separate issue from that. Dividing that up would have nothing to do with whether someone in China can talk with me in the US or Europe. And so it doesn't cause the kind of problem that I think you're mentioning.
Okay, and I understand that we need to complete the panel, so we have, let's say, 1 minute each for each panelist to conclude, if I understand it correctly. And so I think we should start with that one now. Maybe we start with Rufo.
Okay, I just wanted to answer to the gentleman there.
You get a proper microphone there.
To the gentleman in regards to massive surveillance not being effective enough for the mission, and I think that's absolutely proven. I read a few books on history of Mossad and by authoritative sources, and it's kind of a proven fact that Mossad has been contradicting U.S. government about the effectiveness of having wide surveillance networks instead of human intelligence and targeted systems. And they've been fighting over certain theaters of intelligence work about these different approaches. And if we see some of the major terrorist attacks and how there were many people involved and they were not able to track, we could see that that's. So I totally agree that there's no evidence, probably not. It's not effectively to have mass surveillance. So there's other motives, and one motive is just a civilian industrial complex. There's billions and billions to be made that feeds on itself, with lobbying and so on.
That was 1 minute, Rufo,
yeah.
And I think then we should go on.
Sure.
If we really go beyond 1 minute,
and
for
target
you we have difficulties with the others. So can you just give the microphone to?
Yeah, I'll close this with. But targeted surveillance is a different issue that is extremely effective and extremely needed to prevent terrorist attacks, and that's why the proposal by Stephen, I think, is good.
Okay, Alberto. Okay, we're saving up again.
Okay, I've talked enough about governments and this kind of thing. So to other groups, industry, I'm wondering, or private sector, if there is a form of establishing some ethics within this community. Maybe not to collaborate with agencies, because it's not the government having so many experts building all these bad things. It's probably somebody selling it to them. But even more important, it's the user, the citizen, him, herself. And I think education, and we saw one of the slides of Richard's presentation, what to teach in school, and I think just more awareness, and I think power could come out of the people to which deciding which kind of device to use and how to use it, etc.
Okay. Ivo.
The privacy has been lost to companies and to the government. We should recover from that. We should avoid become a surveillance society. We should promote the intelligence against terrorism, but human intelligence. And if we want to put law enforcement technology to enable law enforcement technology in computers, we should be aware it may not be worth it because it can be bypassed by several techniques.
I would still like to advocate this lawful interception or access techniques, because without that we cannot move forward with cyber privacy. And tomorrow morning we'll have another session, I believe, related to that.
As a lawyer, I'm very sensitive to what was said. We need to check the facts before drawing conclusions. So we basically do not have relevant facts or sufficient facts now as to the efficiency of current systems. And clearly we need that information to make an informed choice through politicians and through the democratic process. We lack that now.
Okay. Stephen? Famous last words?
I'll add one last comment. When having this debate, it's very important to distinguish between criminal law and national security, international issues. There are in the U.S. at least, there are very, very strong distinctions and very, very different constitutional protections, but it also reflects what's at stake and what's your operational environment. If you're trying to be a national security agency, you cannot count on cooperation from your target's telephone company, perhaps. Whereas in a domestic criminal investigation, you generally can. So it's often two very different debates, and trying to combine them confuses the issue.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. So we try to address challenge B, and we haven't discussed so much about certification processes. It was touched from time to time, and I think maybe there's a reason for that, because everybody who have been talking to and have been learning from when it came to certification processes, they have said, if you want to have a certification process that can create assurance and trust towards people, one of the absolutely essential things is, and it's regardless whether it's voluntary or mandatory, the goal towards you want to do the certification, and the things that are to be certified need to be made very clear, very precise, and they shouldn't be too complex. Otherwise, existing certification processes cannot survive. So obviously, we need to work more on getting this complex target for certification drilled down to something which can be easily understood for certification. And we see there's lots of work to do for that. So thanks a lot. So we continue tomorrow? No, we cannot go home. We will continue tomorrow, but we will also continue today. But yes, you now can finally have a coffee break of 5 minutes, I understand. And then we would like to see you here back. And we have
we'll see you back in 5 minutes. We're starting a couple of keynotes and the following panel. Thanks to the panelists.
Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to you for participating in this. And see you back in 5 to 10 minutes.